Unique deviation. A unique deviation is going to send flow and information to its unique destination. So this is a one-to-one relationship. We have one source, this process, and we have one unique destination, this other process here. We can have a unique deviation deviate to a start message event or to an intermediate message event. What's going to happen when we deviate to start message event? A new process is going to be created and it's going to be triggered. When we deviate to a start message event, we have to take into account that this object here is never going to be used because it's actually the system that's using this object in order to fill in the information and submit and make the flow exit through this outlet. Okay, so when I deviate from this process, from the source process, and I move the flow into this process here, the first object that's going to be evaluated is going to be the start message event, but it's going to be evaluated automatically with no human intervention. And right after that, the flow is going to immediately go to the next object. In this scenario, if I deviated here at 1 in the morning, probably half a second later, this person is going to receive a task. So here there's not going to be any interaction. And the same thing happens when I deviate back. So here I have a deviator that deviates the flow back to this intermediate event. It's also a one-to-one relation. It's a unique deviation. And this deviator system task is going to trigger the intermediate event. So here there's not going to be any human interaction either. So the flow is going to go immediately to this personal task that we have down here. Here we can see the configuration or the settings of the deviator system task. We're going to see it's quite easy. All we have to do is first select the type of system task, and we're going to select direct deviation. We're not going to use web services for now. So in this course, we're going to learn how to create a direct deviation. The second thing we want to do is select the type. Do we want a unique deviation, a multiple deviation? For now, all we have to know is that a unique deviation is for a one-to-one relationship between one source and one destination. So in this scenario, we're going to use a unique deviation. And the next thing we want to do is select the destination class of process. So here we can see in this field that says destination class of process, we're going to select, well, a list is going to pop up with all the possible destinations. It's going to show me a whole bunch of start message events, of intermediate message events, and I have to select one. Besides, it shows me not only the class of process, the name of the class of process, but each one of the objects, each one of the events of that class of process. So I'll have to select one here. So let's say here we select class of process and the start message event. And if we select the start message event here where it says message event type, it's going to indicate that it's a start message event. If I've selected an intermediate message event, it's going to indicate it down here. So here, for example, we have our source process panel, and here we have our destination process panel. Now we're going to see how we can move the information from one panel to the other one. In this example, since I'm going to deviate to start message event, the only thing I need to know is the class of process and the object. But it's not necessary for me to know the exact reference of the destination process. If I'm going to be deviating to an intermediate message event, then I'm also going to have to indicate the exact reference. This is something we'll see later on in the application. Now here, optionally, if we want, we can store the source reference. So here we have the process panel of the source process, and obviously it has a base reference. And we could say, well, when I move the flow and the data to the destination process, do I also want to move this bit of information? For example, I want to move the reference of the source process to a field in the destination process panel. And I can do that by selecting here a field. Here it's going to offer me all the different fields of the panel in my destination process panel. So let's say I select this field that's called source process reference. I select it here. When the flow goes through the system task, it's going to automatically trigger the destination process panel, and besides it's going to deliver this bit of information, the reference of the source process panel is going to deliver it into a field of the destination process panel. Down here, it's also important to indicate if we want the system to automatically generate a relationship between both processes. This obviously can be done if previously we've created a map between both processes. So the first thing we're going to have to do is create a relation between both processes. This is something we already know how to do. We create a map and we build this relation. Once we have this relation built, we can relate both processes. When the flow goes through the system task, it's going to set or undo the relation between these processes depending on what we selected here. And here we're going to have to select the relation that was previously created. What advantage do I have when I relate one process to another one? The advantage is that from process A, for example, from the source process, I'm going to be able to access the information in process B, this destination class of process. But the way in which I access the information, it's not really like I'm accessing to the panel. What I'm actually doing is I'm going to be able to monitor that process or see the panel information of that process. This is something we can see later on. Now here, as I mentioned, the first thing we're going to do is select the relation. This option applies in those cases where there is more than one deviation to the same intermediate event of a different process. In this case, if there was already an established relation and we want to change it, we could leave this option marked yes. So each time we deviate, it rewrites the information. Over here, we're just going to map the fields that we want from the destination to the source. So the first thing we're going to click here is on add field. It's going to tell me, okay, select a panel field in the destination process, for example, order M, and then it's going to offer me all the compatible fields from the source process. So depending on how many compatible fields, I'll be able to select one. And once I have it mapped down here, I have the origin panel fields, the destination panel fields. Here I'll see a large list or a short list with all the fields that I'm actually going to extract from this source process to the destination process. Finally here we have a return code. A return code is a field that's going to allow us to know in the source process if our deviation was performed correctly. This is something we mentioned before. If it gives me a positive number, it means that the deviation was performed correctly. If it gives me a negative number, that means that something went wrong. And if something went wrong, we're going to have to go to the documentation and check out and see what's happened. Here we can see what happens if, when I'm mapping all the information, I select a group of fields. So let's say I want to drag all the information from the source process, extract it from a group of fields, and drop it into the destination process. Well, the first thing I have to do is select the destination group of fields in the panel of the destination process, and then I'll select a group of fields in the source process, the origin class of process. Now, once I've done this, it's going to allow me to indicate if I want to update the lines in the destination or create new lines. If I say I want to update the lines, that means that if, let's say I deviated previously, so previously I grabbed 10 lines out of the source process and I took them to the destination process. And let's say later on in the source process, maybe there was 3 or 4 lines modified, and there's another deviator that's going to deviate back from the source process to the destination process. And when it does this, we just want to update the information in the group of fields in the destination process. Or we might want to create new lines. So we can mark this option or this other one. If we say create new lines, it doesn't matter if we already deviated those 10 lines. If we deviate again, it's going to create 10 new lines in the destination. This means that the destination is going to now have 20 lines. Besides here, we can indicate the fields that we want to deviate. So it's going to allow us to map all the columns. Obviously, if the group of fields in the source panel is the same as the group of fields in the destination panel, we're not going to have any compatibility options. Basically, we're going to be able to map everything very easily. Besides, they're going to have the same internal names. But in some scenarios, we might have totally different groups of fields. So we might want to map the fields and be careful and make sure that one specific field, for example, that's called status, is going to be dropped into the destination column of a group of fields, and maybe in the destination it's called something else. So we're going to have to carefully map the information between one group of fields and the other one. And down here, we can also indicate, let's say in the columns of the group of fields, we also have library terms. And obviously, library terms contain information. They have documents or whatever files we've uploaded. So what do we want to do when we grab the information from the group of fields in the source and we drop it into the destination? Do we also want to physically move the documents? So do we want to delete them from the source and only leave them in the destination panel? Or do we actually want to copy the documents? So we have the exact same information in the source and in the destination class of process, sorry, in the destination process. The next thing we're going to see is how I'm going to actually configure these deviator system tasks to deviate the flow from one process to another one. So I have a source process, here's called origin, and I want the flow to go into this start message event, to this deviator system task, and once it reaches this deviator system task, I want it to deviate to this other class of process. We can see it here. So it's going to deviate to this start message event. Once it's deviated to this start message event, the flow is going to go down here. It's going to assign some values to a text field, an uploader, and later on it's going to deviate the flow back to the source process. So this deviator system task is going to deviate to this intermediate message event in the source process, this one here. So let me take a screenshot just to have a better explanation of what we're going to do now. So this is my source process, and this is my destination process. Okay, so this is what I'm going to do. We're going to move the flow. We're going to launch the process. It's going to go down here. It's going to go to this deviator system task. And as soon as it arrives to this deviator system task, what's going to happen is that we're going to move the flow to this start message event. Now the flow is going to go over here, the start message event, to this system task. Afterwards, it's going to continue. And this deviator system task is going to send the flow back into this intermediate message event. Okay, we can already see that this intermediate message event was already waiting for the flow to arrive. So it was activated and it was waiting for the flow to arrive. Let's say we didn't have any flow here. Obviously, it's going to give us an error. So it's going to give us a negative number. Let's say we launched this process and we didn't change the mode in this process. So this one is just, it doesn't allow us to do tests, or it doesn't allow us to trigger processes. Then it's going to give us an error in this system task. So we have to make sure to have everything published, everything is working correctly, the logic has to be correctly built, and once this is done, we can communicate the flow and the data between these two processes. So what I want to do first is go to the source process, and here I have a system task. All I'm going to do is click on the system task and show you guys the configuration, but afterwards I'm going to delete it and I'm going to reconfigure it. So the first thing we selected is the type of system task. We selected a unique deviation. And here we selected the destination class of process. Here we can realize that when we selected the destination class of process, we don't need to send the flow to a specific instance of the process. This is why the system is not going to ask me later on for the reference of that exact instance. But here in the destination process, here we do want to deviate the flow to an intermediate event. So here it is going to ask me to give more information. We do need to know the destination instance. So in this configuration, it detected that I configured it to deviate to an intermediate event. And then here it's going to ask me, okay, where is the destination process saved in? Give me a reference, give me a specific instance, or I'm not going to be able to deviate. So here where it says destination process saved in, I'm going to have to select a panel field. As we mentioned earlier, it could be a suffix, for example, or whatever other field that can contain information that has previously stored the reference of that process. So let's go back to the source process. Here we can see the process is launched, it's triggered, it's initiated. Here it deviates to the destination process. When we're deviating to the destination process, here we're saying that we also want to deviate the reference of the source process. So here we're saying grab the reference of this source process, and when we deviate the flow, also deviate this bit of information, deviate the reference into this one-line text field. And this is the exact same information that we're going to use in the destination process to deviate the flow to an intermediate event. So here we can see we have this bit of information stored in the destination, This is why here, when we're configuring the destination system task, where we want to deviate back to the source process, here we've selected the one-line text field. So here it says, okay, to what exact instance do you want to deviate? And here we selected the one-line text field because we know it contains the information. It contains the reference, the base reference of the source process, because we have previously delivered it to this process in this other system task. Okay, so here we selected unique, we selected the class of process and the object. Here we're saying we want to send the reference to the destination. Here we're not going to bother about annexes because this is something related to SharePoint and we're probably not going to use this. But if we need more information, we can check the documentation. Here we can set or undo the relation. This is what we already mentioned. If we say we want to set a relation, we have to select the relation between both processes. And this has to be previously created in structure. And then down here, we've just mapped all the fields. Here we mapped a multiple line text field to drag the information from the source and bring it to the destination. And here are a group of fields. Here we can see we have all these options that we've already explained. And finally, we have a return code. So if the deviation was performed correctly, it's going to give me a positive number and it's going to store it in a field that's called return code 0. So now the first thing I'm going to do is delete the information here. I'm going to configure it from scratch. So I'll click on the system task and I'll select, where is it? Deviator without web service. I'll continue. And here I'll just leave it on unique. I'm going to select the destination class of process. And here we can see it's just showing me 41 destinations, 41 possible destinations. Now, we have to select the exact class of process. I know it's, there we go. So I filtered and I can see this destination class of process only has a star message event. If it would have more objects, more message objects, like different intermediate events, they'd all appear in this list and I'd have to choose the exact event that I want to deviate to. But this is something we'll see later. So we're going to deviate to star message event of this class of process. It's called teacher deviation. Okay, my demonstration process. I select it and now it says, okay, I know you're going to deviate to this class of process, to this star message event, IM1. It doesn't ask me for a reference or anything because it's going to create a new process from scratch and it doesn't need it. And here's going to tell me, okay, do you want to grab the reference of this process and send it to the destination? I'm going to say yes. So I'm going to map it with this field. This field is stored in the destination panel. Since we already selected the star message event and the destination class of process, it's offering me the panel of the class of process that I selected here. So here we have a compatible field. We selected it. And then down here, we can see that by default, it's already mapped all the information for me. So it says, okay, the exact same fields that I have in both panels, I'm going to map them so the user doesn't have to map them all. Let's say this is a very simple scenario. We only have two general fields and a group of fields, but there might be scenarios where we have 200 or 500 different fields. So this is quite comfortable. Now, in this case, for example, I don't want to map the return code, so I'll just take it off. There we go. So all I'm going to do is map this multiple line text field and this group of fields. And now here I do want to store a return code. So I'll select it from the panel of the source process. And there we go. We've got our system task totally configured and ready to go. Now I'm going to go to the destination process. And here in the destination process, I'm going to do the exact same thing. I'm going to configure this system task. First, I'm going to delete it. And now I'm going to go here, just back into its configuration. I'll select, I want a deviator system task. I want to deviate without using web services, and I'll hit the button continue. Now, again, it's going to be a unique deviation, this time to an intermediate event. And here we can see for this class of process, since we have two message events, one of them is a star message event and the other one is an intermediate message event, it's telling me, okay, choose to which one of these objects do you want to deviate. And in this case, we're going to deviate to an intermediate message event. So I select it Now it's already detected that it's an intermediate message event, and it tells me, okay, now tell me the exact instance, or in what field of the panel am I going to be able to find the exact reference of that process. So here we're going to select this field here because we know we've already prepared it so that it's always going to contain the reference of the source process. And now it's the same field that we used the other time. It's saying, do we want to store the reference of this process in the source process? Not really, so we can leave this empty. It's not mandatory. And then down here, again, we have everything already mapped for us. We're going to take this one off. And we're going to select here the return code, this field. Okay, so I've already set it up. These two processes should be able to communicate perfectly with each other. So I'll save and exit. Very important to make sure the two processes are actually in a mode that allows us to run tests. So I can leave in development mode, but I have to make sure to mark yes here. That way I can run tests. And the same thing happens with this other class of process. I want to make sure. I go to mode. Perfect. So the first process I'm going to launch is this process here, the source process. So I'll go to the star message event and I'll copy the URL. There we go. And I'll paste it here on my browser. I could also go to my tasks and trigger it from there. But anyways, it's a simple demonstration. All I'm going to do is trigger the process, start it. Now that I've launched the process, I can go to reports. I can click on the tab executions. I can search for this class of process I just triggered. And once I found it, I can select it. And here I can see all the tests that I've done. This is the last one I just triggered. I'm going to enter. And here we can see the diagram. So apparently it went from the star message event, it went through the system task. So supposedly it's deviated correctly. Now we're going to check that. Then it stops here in the intermediate message event. But since the destination process, it's totally automatic, there's just system tasks, it immediately deviated back to this event. Then the flow continues to this personal task. So I'm quite sure that this is actually deviated correctly because the only way in which this EM can be triggered is with the deviation that came back from the other process. So here when I go to panel, I can check the return code. We can see it's 143. This is a positive number. This means that the deviation was performed correctly. But I want to make sure, so I'm going to monitor the other process. Here it is. Here we can also see there's two instances. I'm going to open the last one. And here we can see this process was triggered in the star message event. After that, it went to the system task. After that, it went to the second system task, and here it deviated back to the source process. Now, if I go to panel, here I can also see the return code, 144. So apparently both deviations were performed correctly. I can go back to the monitoring here and go to execution. Here I can see this task. And we can see here there's some information that says this data has been introduced in the derivative process, so in the destination process. And this here has also been introduced in that process. When was this done? It was actually uploaded, just for the demonstration, what I did is the process starts, and here we upload those values, and after uploading these values, we deviate back to the source process. Let's see the configuration. So I go to structure, processes, destination, and here you can see the configuration. The flow goes in, it goes to this uploader system task, and here we have one upload that uploads this information. So this data has been introduced in this process, and it's also being uploaded in a line in the group of fields. Okay, so basically, once the flow enters this process, it uploads this information and it sends back the information to the source process. This is why now, when I go to this process, this is the source process, and I open this task, I can actually see the data has been populated in these fields. Okay, so this means that the, the information has been generated correctly. Besides, in the reference here, we're storing the reference of the process in which this line was created. Here we can see the reference ATS 33.1. This is the class of process, the source class of process. The instance is number 2. But here we can see that this line was created in the class of process ATS 34.1 and in the instance 2. Okay, so we know that this line was actually generated in the destination process and brought to the panel of this process thanks to the deviation.